I stood in the bank staring at the balance. $847. Yesterday, it showed $180,000. The teller repeated the number like maybe I couldn't hear her. All I could think about was how I was supposed to thank Mike for 20 years of friendship. Mike wasn't just my best friend. He was the one person I trusted without a second thought. We'd known each other since high school, stuck through every storm life threw at us. My parents' divorce, his dad passing, those first crappy jobs we hated, the breakups that knocked us down. When other people faded, Mike stayed. He was the guy who showed up at 3 in the morning when you needed him, who spotted you cash without a single question, who knew every ugly detail of your life and never used it against you. That kind of loyalty is rare. It's the kind of thing you don't question. Mike was family, even if we didn't share blood. So when he came to me with an idea, his new project, a tech startup building apps for small businesses, I didn't hesitate. He always had a knack for this stuff. Where I struggled to keep up with trends, Mike was already 2 steps ahead. It made sense. And for once, I actually had money ready to invest. A few months before, I sold my share of the family restaurant. 10 years of work, long nights, greasy hands, and endless hours. Walking away wasn't easy, but the money sitting in my account felt like the first breath after being underwater. $180,000. That was everything I had managed to build. It wasn't a fortune by most standards, but to me, it was 10 years of my life. I could have thrown it at my mortgage. I could have played it safe, stacked it away, or spread it out in small investments. But when Mike laid out his plan, it didn't feel like a risk. It felt obvious. This was my best friend, the guy who had my back since we were kids. If I couldn't bet on him, who could I bet on? He spoke with so much conviction about the startup, about how businesses everywhere were looking for affordable tech solutions, how his app would fill that gap, how he already had interest from potential partners. I remember sitting across from him, nodding, already picturing the next chapter of my life. For the first time, I wasn't just clocking in for a paycheck. I was about to be part of something bigger. I wired the money. All of it. No contracts, no lawyers, no paperwork. Just trust. Just Mike. The number looked unreal on the screen as it disappeared from my account. 180,000 gone in a single transaction. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From excitement. From pride. I wasn't just investing in a company. I was investing in my best friend. At the time, it felt like the safest decision I had ever made. The first few months felt like everything was finally going right. Mike kept me updated constantly. He'd call late at night, send screenshots of designs, show me short demo videos of the app working. He always sounded excited, confident, like we were on the edge of something huge. One night, he invited me to his apartment to look over the prototype. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. I could click through the menus, see how small businesses might actually use it. It wasn't just lines of code, it felt real. For a guy like me who spent most of his life running a restaurant, it was like stepping into another world. I didn't understand all the details, but Mike did. And that was enough for me. He made sure I saw the progress in person too. He invited me to a presentation for potential investors in one of those glassy downtown office buildings. There were people in suits, catered food, even a slideshow with charts that looked like something out of a magazine. Mike introduced me as one of the first investors, like I was part of the inner circle. I shook hands, smiled, and listened to him talk about projected growth and user acquisition. I didn't even know what half of it meant, but the way the audience nodded made me feel like I was in on something big. For the first time, I felt proud of where my money went. This wasn't just about profit, it was about being part of a real startup, something innovative. I kept thinking how crazy it was that a guy like me, just a restaurant manager, could suddenly be tied to something people were calling the future of small business. Mike kept saying that within a year, my 180,000 could turn into $500,000. I didn't press him for details. I didn't need to. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke with certainty, made me believe it. I started letting myself imagine things I never thought possible, paying off the mortgage, maybe even getting a better car, maybe finally giving myself a break after years of grinding just to stay afloat. Even my friends started to notice the change in me. When I mentioned I had put money into a tech company, they looked at me differently. Some joked that I'd be the first millionaire in our group. Others asked questions, trying to figure out how I got into it. I always gave the same answer. It's Mike. He knows what he's doing. Every time I said those words, I believed them. Mike wasn't just my friend anymore. He was my way into a better future. I went to bed at night thinking I had finally made the smartest decision of my life. The first warning sign came out of nowhere. I was at the mall, just killing time on a Saturday, when I spotted a guy I recognized. His name was Danny, one of the developers Mike had introduced me to during that investor presentation. I figured it would be good to say hi, maybe even remind him that I was one of the early backers of the project. I walked over, shook his hand, and asked how things were going with the app. He looked at me like I had asked about a dead relative. Then he said, "What project?" "I quit 3 months ago." Mike shut it down. Said the funding fell through. I stood there frozen. My first reaction was to laugh it off, like maybe Danny was confused, maybe he had the wrong timeline. But the way he said it, the way his face tightened like he'd been burned, stuck with me. He didn't look like someone out of the loop. He looked like someone who had been lied to. That night, I couldn't get it out of my head. I called Mike. He picked up right away, cheerful as ever, launching into his usual update about how things were moving fast, how he barely had time to breathe with all the progress being made. His voice was smooth, confident, exactly the way it always was. I tried to steer the conversation. I asked about Danny. I said I ran into him, and he mentioned leaving the team. For the first time since this whole thing began, Mike hesitated. It was only a second, but I caught it. Then he laughed, brushing it off. "Yeah, Danny was always kind of a complainer. Didn't have the work ethic we needed. Honestly, it was better for the team to move on without him. Dead weight, you know?" The words made sense, but something about the way he said them didn't. He wasn't sharp or defensive. He was calm, almost too calm, like he had rehearsed it. I wanted to believe him. I told myself Danny was probably bitter, maybe embarrassed about being cut loose. But that image of his face, the way he said the project was dead, kept flashing in my mind. After the call, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper. But another part of me, the bigger part, told me to let it go. This was Mike, my friend, the guy who had never once let me down. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. It was the first time since I wired the money that doubt slipped in. And once it was there, it didn't leave. The doubt kept eating at me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told myself it wasn't about trust, it was just about peace of mind. If everything was fine, then I'd sleep better knowing for sure. If something was off, at least I'd know where I stood. I started small. I looked up a couple of the other names Mike had mentioned when he first showed me the team. Through LinkedIn, I tracked down 2 more developers. I messaged them, pretending I was just networking. Both replied quickly, and both told me almost the same thing. The project had been shut down months ago. The funding dried up, the office lease ended, and everyone was let go. Reading those messages felt like a punch in the stomach. For weeks, maybe months, while Mike had been sending me progress reports and talking about new features, there hadn't even been a team. The office was gone. The project was over. My hands shook as I held the phone. A part of me wanted to throw it across the room, smash it against the wall. Instead, I sat down, stared at the messages, and forced myself to breathe. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe Mike had restarted with a new team. Maybe the updates weren't lies. I clung to those thoughts like a lifeline. But the truth was louder than my excuses. Mike had been feeding me stories long after the project was already dead. I dialed his number. My chest felt tight as it rang. He answered like always, friendly, upbeat, the voice of a man with everything under control. I didn't waste time. I told him I had spoken to a couple of his old developers, that they said the project was shut down. I asked him, point blank, what was really happening. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched, and I could hear my own breathing in the receiver. Finally, he sighed and said there had been a temporary setback. The first round of funding collapsed. The team had to be cut, but he claimed he had already found new investors. He said the project was alive again, better than ever. His tone was calm, reassuring, almost too polished. He said, "You've always trusted me, right? Just keep trusting me a little longer. We're back on track." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hang up and pretend that everything made sense. But my gut told me I was standing at a line I couldn't uncross. Either I swallowed his story whole, or I admitted to myself that my best friend might be lying straight to my face. And in that moment, I wasn't sure which option scared me more. I couldn't shake the feeling anymore. Mike's words were smooth, but they didn't land the way they used to. Every time he told me to just trust him, I heard something different underneath. I needed facts, not promises. So I did something I never thought I'd do against my best friend. I hired a private investigator. It felt paranoid at first, almost shameful, like I was betraying him. But I justified it by telling myself, if he's telling the truth, then I'll know for sure and we can move on. If he's not, well, I had to know. The investigator didn't take long. Within a week, he had more answers than I managed to get in half a year of updates from Mike. And none of it looked like what I wanted to hear. Yes, Mike had rented that office. Yes, he had hired a small team. But it was smoke and mirrors. The lease was only for 2 months, just enough to give an impression of stability. The developers worked briefly, then were cut loose when the money dried up. And my money? It didn't go where Mike said it would. The investigator traced spending records, a brand new car, a trip to Europe, tens of thousands poured into paying off his personal credit card debt, even a down payment on an apartment for his girlfriend. It was all there in black and white. I felt my throat close as I read the report. This wasn't a temporary setback. There was no project anymore. It had been over before I even started asking questions. But the part that gutted me wasn't the money. It was what came last. The investigator told me Mike had done this before. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't the only one. Over the past 3 years, he had taken money from at least 4 other people we both knew. Some gave him 20 grand, some 50, one even more. All under different excuses, business ideas, temporary loans, investment opportunities. Together, it added up to more than $500,000. And just like me, they had stayed quiet. Too embarrassed to admit they'd been fooled. Too hopeful that Mike would make things right eventually. Too trusting of good old Mike. When the investigator finished talking, I just sat there. My body felt heavy, like I couldn't move. The person I thought I knew better than anyone else had been lying, not just to me, but to all of us. It wasn't one mistake. It wasn't bad luck. It was deliberate, calculated. And the worst part? Even after everything I had just learned, a piece of me still wanted to hear Mike explain it himself. After the investigator's report, everything in my life felt different. Food didn't taste like anything. Nights stretched into endless hours staring at the ceiling. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't hold a normal conversation. All I kept asking myself was one question. How could I have been so blind? Every memory of Mike twisted into something else. The late-night calls, the confidence in his voice, the way he told me to trust him like I always had. It all replayed in my head, but now it sounded like rehearsed lines. And the worst part was, I still couldn't believe it. A part of me refused to accept that the guy I grew up with, the guy I called my brother, had looked me in the eye while stealing everything I had. I went to a lawyer, hoping there was some way to fight back. He listened, flipped through the documents, then leaned back and gave me the blunt truth. Legally, it looked like I'd just loaned Mike the money. No contract, no repayment terms, no proof of fraud. Even if we pursued charges, it would take years, and the odds of seeing a single dollar back were slim to none. I'm sorry, he said. I know this hurts, but in cases like this, people rarely recover the money. Those words were harder to swallow than the report itself. I had already spent the last $5,000 I had on legal fees, just to hear that I was stuck. My account was empty, my savings gone. 10 years of work erased in less than a year. But the financial hit wasn't the worst. The shame was worse. I couldn't bring myself to tell my family. My parents already thought I'd been reckless selling my stake in the restaurant. How could I admit that I handed every penny to a scam that never even existed? My friends wouldn't understand either. To them, Mike was still the smart one, the guy who always seemed ahead of the curve. And the friends we had in common? That was the part that cut the deepest. When whispers started spreading, people took sides. Some said maybe Mike really did run into trouble, that he just needed time. Others didn't want to get involved at all. Nobody wanted to hear the full story, because hearing it meant admitting they could be next. So I stayed quiet. I went through my days pretending everything was fine while inside I was drowning in anger and humiliation. I replayed every decision, every red flag I ignored, every moment I chose trust over caution. And I kept coming back to the same thought. I wasn't just broke. I was alone. I sat in my apartment, the investigator's folder still on the table, untouched for days. My phone buzzed with reminders, bills, useless notifications, but I kept staring at one thing: the list of names he'd given me. The other people Mike had taken money from. Each name came with an amount: 20,000, 50,000, another 75, all gone, the same way mine had disappeared. I imagined their faces when they realized the truth, the same shock that had ripped through me. And I wondered if they were also sitting alone right now, too ashamed to tell anyone, pretending their lives hadn't just been shattered by the same man we all trusted. I could have let it go. That option was always there. Start over, save again, bury the mistake deep enough that no one would ever know. I was only 34. It wasn't too late to rebuild, even if it meant starting from zero. The safer part of me wanted that. Keep quiet. Move on. Act like Mike never existed. Save face with family. Avoid messy fights with mutual friends. Avoid the public humiliation of admitting that I had handed over everything I owned without a single document to protect me. But the other option sat right there in front of me. Call the others. Put our stories together. Go after him, not for the money, because that was gone, but for the truth. For accountability. To stop him from pulling the same trick on someone else. The thought of it terrified me. It would mean dragging everything into the open. People would know I wasn't the sharp investor I'd pretended to be. They would know I'd been fooled, just like the rest. It would mean choosing a fight that could last years, maybe longer, with no guarantee of anything changing. I looked at the names again. For people. For lives. For sets of savings. For stories like mine. Maybe worse. I realized that if I stayed silent, Mike would keep winning, even if he never scammed another person again. He would win because none of us stood up. My hands hovered over my phone, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. One call could unravel everything. My privacy, my reputation, whatever scraps of peace I had left. But it could also mean that, for once, Mike didn't get away with it. I sat there for hours, staring at that list, knowing I couldn't stay in the middle forever. Sooner or later, I would have to choose. In the end, I made the call. Then another. And another. Within a week, I'd spoken with every person on that list. Each conversation felt like hearing my own story told back to me. The promises, the charm, the trust that seemed unbreakable until it wasn't. We were all carrying the same weight, the same humiliation. We agreed on one thing. This couldn't stay in the dark. We hired a lawyer together, filed a collective lawsuit, and went to the financial crimes unit with everything we had. For the first time since losing my money, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. We didn't stop there. One of the others suggested creating a group online, a place to share our experiences and warn people. It grew faster than I expected. Strangers reached out with their own stories, people who had crossed paths with Mike in different cities, different circles. Some had lost money. Some had just gotten suspicious and walked away in time. The pattern was undeniable. Soon, a local paper picked it up. The headline read, "Man accused of conning friends out of $500,000. Seeing Mike's name in print like that hit me harder than I thought it would. For years, he'd been good old Mike, the guy who everyone trusted, the guy I would have bet my life on. Now he was being called what he really was, a con artist. Not long after, my phone rang. It was him. I stared at the screen until it stopped buzzing, then it lit up again. I finally picked up. His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. He begged me to meet, said everything had gotten out of control, swore he'd find a way to pay it all back if I just gave him time. He said he was sorry. He said he'd explain everything. But I didn't believe him. Not anymore. I told him I had nothing left to say and hung up. That was the last time I heard his voice. A few days later, news spread that Mike was gone. He'd taken his own life. He left behind a note, admitting everything. He wrote about debts he couldn't escape, lies that spun out until they swallowed him whole, and a line about being sorry to the people he hurt. I sat there with the article pulled up on my phone, reading it over and over, not sure how to feel. For months, I'd wanted him to face the truth. Now he never would. And somehow, that felt worse than losing the money. The case was officially closed. The lawyers sent one final envelope, a thin stack of papers that meant nothing now. No money to recover, no property to divide, nothing left but words on paper. I stood by the mailbox, holding that envelope like it weighed more than it should. It was over. Not in the way I'd hoped, not with answers or justice, but with silence. A few days later, I was walking down my street when I saw her, Mike's mom. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the years had pressed down on her. She stopped me, her voice soft but steady. She said, "He always told me you were his best friend." I didn't know how to respond. The words hit harder than I expected. Best friend. That was what he called me. Even while he was draining my savings. Even while he was lying to my face. Maybe he believed it. Maybe in his own twisted way, friendship meant something different to him. Taking, promising, covering up, then asking for forgiveness when it all collapsed. I stood there, nodding, but no words came out. She waited for an answer, then gave me a sad smile and walked away. The money never came back. The savings I worked 10 years for disappeared into a car I'd never drive, a vacation I never took, an apartment that wasn't mine. And yet, standing there on that street, I realized the numbers in my account weren't the heaviest loss. It was the trust, the certainty I had in someone I thought I knew better than anyone else. I started living differently after that. Not louder, not bolder, but sharper. Careful in ways I never thought I needed to be. When someone says, "Just trust me," I don't nod anymore. I ask for proof. I ask for documents. I protect myself, even if it makes me seem cold. Mike taught me that. He taught me what betrayal looks like when it wears the face of your closest friend. He taught me how far someone can go when they know you'll never doubt them. And now, whenever I hear his name, I don't think about the car, or the trip, or even the money. I think about that key moment. The second I looked at my empty bank balance and realized my best friend had turned me into his last mark. That's the memory that never leaves. Thanks for staying till the end. What's your take on this story? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe. More true and hidden stories are coming soon.